Charles Duke walked on the moon. He was there. He saw something that has never appeared in any official report, something NASA went silent for 30 seconds to decide how to handle. And for 50 years, he said nothing. Not because it wasn't real, because he understood exactly what speaking would cost him. Now he is 89 years old, and the calculus has changed. Before he dies, he says, people need to know what was actually found up there. And what he is describing explains something nobody has ever been able to answer. Why we went to the moon 6 times, found what we found, and never went back. The voice in the room. On July 20th, 1969, Charles Duke was the most important voice on Earth. He was 33 years old, a United States Air Force test pilot, selected from thousands of candidates, razor sharp and unshakable. NASA didn't choose him for the lunar program, despite his composure under pressure. They chose him because of it. When the moment came, he was the Capcom, the single voice connecting mission control in Houston to the 2 men descending toward a world no human had ever touched. The entire planet was listening. Hundreds of millions of people across every continent, watching on black and white televisions, holding their breath. And it was Charles Duke's voice, cool, dry, completely steady, that told them it had happened. He told the crew that a bunch of guys in Houston had been about to turn blue, that they were breathing again, and thanked them. Cool, dry, completely steady. Here's what that tells you about the man. Facts were his language. Precision was his religion. He was not someone who exaggerated. He was not someone who imagined things. He was selected for the lunar program exactly because under any pressure, in any situation, he reported only what was real. 3 years later, he walked on the moon himself, and what he found there, what he reported, what was ignored, what was buried, is what he is determined to place on. The record before, he no longer can. If what Duke is about to describe cost him 50 years of silence, it's worth 2 seconds of yours. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Apollo 16. The mission launched on April 16, 1972. Duke and Commander John Young descended to the Descartes Highlands on April 21st, one of the most geologically complex landing sites in the entire Apollo program. Scientists believe the region held ancient volcanic origins, a rugged, cratered landscape untouched for billions of years. They stayed 71 hours. They drove the lunar rover across terrain no human eyes had ever seen. They ran every experiment on the checklist. They collected 95 kilograms of samples from craters and ridgelines, more than any prior mission. When they returned to Earth, NASA's official assessment was unambiguous. Every objective met, every box checked. The crew had performed flawlessly. Apollo 16 was cited as one of the most successful missions in the entire program. Duke has never disputed that assessment. What he disputes is what it left out. Stop and think about what that means. A mission NASA called perfect. Flawless, exceptional. And the man who was actually on the surface says the official record doesn't contain everything that happened, that the version history received was edited, deliberately, by people who decided the full account was not something the public was ready to hold. Duke has spent 50 years knowing what those edits removed. He is 89 now, and he is done staying quiet. The structures, 6 kilometers from the lunar module, on the far side of a ridge where Earth wasn't even visible in the sky above them, the mission changed. It was routine geological sample collection, the kind of methodical work you run on near autopilot, hands moving through the checklist, mind drifting, boots crunching on the regolith in the absolute silence of a world without atmosphere. Duke has described those stretches as almost meditative. After days on the surface, you stop fighting the alien quality of it. You stop trying to map it onto anything familiar. You just move. You just exist inside the stillness, and the stillness wraps around you like something physical. The crunch of boots on regolith, the soft hiss of the life support system cycling behind your ears, the faint crackle of an open radio channel carrying only static from 240,000 miles away. This is the part NASA never put in the mission summary. Then Duke looked toward the horizon, and everything stopped. Something was wrong with the shapes. Here's what you need to understand about the moon. Everything on it is random. Craters, boulders, rubble fields. The product of billions of years of meteorite impacts, governed entirely by chaos and deep time. Nothing has clean edges. Nothing repeats. Nothing lines up. That is not an interpretation. That is the geology. The moon is chaos made solid, and it has been that way since before complex life existed on Earth. What Duke saw on that horizon had edges, deliberate geometry, lines too straight, angles too uniform, too purposeful to be accidental, too consistent to be natural. Not the rounded randomness of impact sculpted rock. Something else? He called it out to Young without hesitation. Young stopped the rover immediately. He saw it too. They drove closer, slowly, the rover kicking up fine gray dust that hung suspended in the airless vacuum before settling back to the surface like powder through stillness. Neither of them spoke. The radio was open, but silent. Just breathing, just the crackle of an open channel going nowhere. Duke has said that in that approach, he and Young didn't need to discuss what they were looking at. The shapes were doing the communicating. Every meter they covered made the sight harder to explain away. And neither of them tried. There was nothing to try with. As they closed the final distance, the shapes resolved into something that made every hour of training, every mission briefing, every confident assumption about what the moon was supposed to contain completely irrelevant. A wall, or the remnant of a foundation. Angular, constructed from large blocks, coated in a thick layer of lunar dust accumulated over an incomprehensible span of time, but unmistakably, undeniably constructed. Not carved by impacts, not formed by volcanic forces, not the product of any geological process they had ever been briefed on. Built, deliberately and purposefully built, by something with intelligence and intent. Duke has estimated it stretched roughly 100 meters in length and disappeared beneath the regolith at both ends, as though the moon had slowly swallowed it across eons. Like they were seeing the exposed spine of something vastly larger buried underneath them. The scale of it, Duke has said, was impossible to absorb quickly. Your mind runs through every available alternative. A trick of the light, unusual geology, visor, distortion. Your training insists there is a rational explanation because everything in your training was built on the assumption that there would always be one. At close range, there was no rational explanation. Duke keyed his radio. He described what they were seeing in clear, precise language. The language of a test pilot, the language of a man whose entire career was built on communicating technical observations under pressure. He reported a geometric formation, stated it was not natural in origin, described it as appearing constructed, estimated its length at approximately 100 meters, and requested guidance from Houston. Then nothing. Not the normal 1.3-second signal delay that becomes instinct on a lunar mission. The rhythmic beat Duke knew as well as his own heartbeat. This was something else, something that broke the beat entirely. 2 seconds, 5, 10. Duke and Young looked at each other through their visors. Two men on the surface of the moon, trained for every possible contingency. Between them, they represented thousands of hours of preparation for crisis, equipment failure, medical emergency, navigation breakdown. Scenarios were rehearsed until responses became instinct. They had protocols for everything. Neither of them had a protocol for this. Duke called again, asking Houston to confirm they were receiving. Nothing. 20 seconds, 30. Think about what those 30 seconds mean. In a mission environment where a 1.3-second delay is enough to notice, 30 seconds of silence from mission control is not a technical anomaly. It is a decision. Someone in Houston heard the transmission, understood what had been reported, and chose, deliberately, not to respond while they figured out what to say. He could hear his own breathing inside the helmet, the steady hiss of the oxygen system, the empty crackle of the open channel carrying nothing from 250,000 miles away. He looked back at the structure while they waited, still there, still real, still impossible. The gray blocks sitting in the ancient dust as though they had always been there, patient, silent, indifferent to the two small figures in white suits staring at them. Two men on the moon, completely alone, staring at something that shouldn't exist. And the only people who could hear them had gone deliberately, pointedly, quietly silent. When Houston finally responded, the voice was flat and controlled. No curiosity, no alarm, no acknowledgement, no follow-up questions of any kind. The response was a single operational instruction: continue with planned EVA sample collection activities. That was it. That was Houston's entire reply to two astronauts reporting artificial structures on the surface of the moon. No request for detail. No expression of any reaction. Just a cold order to move on, as if they already knew. The photographs. Duke and Young didn't simply comply. Before Houston repeated the order, they worked fast. Duke took photographs, dozens of them, close-ups of the individual blocks, wide shots showing the full length of the structure against the horizon, context frames from every angle they could cover. Duke pressed the shutter himself. He saw the images in the viewfinder, crystal clear, perfectly exposed. Everything exactly as it appeared to his eyes on the surface. Those photographs have never been released, not one. Over the decades since, Duke has asked NASA about them repeatedly, formally, informally, through colleagues, through official channels. The answers have never been consistent. Classified for technical reasons, lost during archival transfer, image quality too degraded for public release. Each answer different from the last. None of them satisfying to a man who was standing right there, who pressed the shutter with his own gloved hands, who saw the results in the camera. Duke has described his reaction to those non-answers as barely contained fury. He says with complete certainty, those photographs are in a vault somewhere, intact, clear, and deliberately kept from the public for over 50 years. Here's the part that doesn't let you sleep. The structures themselves are not the most disturbing element of what Duke found. It's their age. In a 2019 interview, Duke was asked directly whether the structures looked recent. He was sitting in a chair, 87 years old, and he shook his head slowly before answering. He described them as profoundly eroded, worn in ways that demand explanation. Because on the moon, there is no wind, no rain, no weather of any kind, no mechanism by which surface structures should erode at all, in any time frame that makes ordinary sense. And yet, the blocks were covered in micrometeorite impact craters, the kind that accumulate only over millions of years of continuous exposure to space, the kind that planetary scientists use as a reliable geological clock, hundreds of millions of years old, possibly more. Whatever built those structures was on the moon so long ago that it predates not just human civilization, but the human species. It was there before the first dinosaur walked, before most complex life on Earth had developed, before almost anything we would recognize as biology had taken hold on the planet below. Duke paused when he reached that point in the interview. A long, heavy pause. Then he said, NASA knows this, and they decided the public shouldn't. The anomalies. The structures were the physical discovery, the photographed, reported, deliberately suppressed evidence. But they weren't the only thing wrong with that mission. Go back and watch the unedited Apollo 16 footage, not the highlight reels, the full uncut surface recordings. There are moments that appear in no official summary, moments where Duke goes completely still mid-sentence, mid-step, and stares at something outside the camera's frame, something the lens never finds. In those moments, John Young's voice comes through, on the recording, audibly tight, asking Duke if he is all right. There is a pause that runs longer than it should. Then Duke responds, barely audible, saying he is fine and that he is just looking. His voice carries the sound of a man trying to process something his training gave him no framework for. The transcripts do not explain what he was looking at. The post-mission reports do not mention it. Beyond those moments, Duke has described two specific anomalies he experienced consistently on the surface. The first was the light. Sunlight on the moon should be pure white. No atmosphere means no scattering, no spectrum separation. That's textbook physics, part of every astronaut's basic briefing. But on the surface, Duke saw blues and purples shifting slowly across the regolith, moving in patterns that matched no equipment reflection or visor artifact he could identify. The light itself was behaving in ways that contradicted the physics of an airless world. The second was sound. On the moon, sound transmission through air is physically impossible. There is no medium for it. What Duke described was not radio feed, not suit vibration. Actual tones, actual frequencies, sometimes near harmonic, sometimes deeply unsettling. He asked Young directly if he could hear it. Young said yes. Two of the most rigorously screened test pilots in the history of spaceflight, experiencing the same phenomenon that the laws of physics say cannot exist. Their accounts matched in every detail. They told no one, because no one would have believed them, and because the program would have ended for both of them if they had reported it. Duke has said both anomalies were more intense near the structure, the light more concentrated, the tones louder, almost directional, as if the structure itself was the source, as if whatever it was had been running for a very long time and was still running when two astronauts from a young planet drove close enough to notice. The reunion. Duke has never claimed to be the only one. In 2017, most of the surviving Apollo moonwalkers gathered privately. Picture the room. Old men in their 80s, moving slowly, some with the careful deliberateness of men who know their bodies have a timeline, the only living human beings who had stood on the surface of another world. Many of them not having spoken honestly about their experiences in decades. Some of them had never spoken honestly about them at all. Not to their families, not to colleagues, not to anyone. According to Duke, it was the first time many of them said any of it out loud. Everyone had anomalies, different things, different missions, different locations. None of their experiences matched what NASA told the public, and all of them had stayed quiet for the same reason. No one would have believed them, and the program they had devoted their lives to would have been destroyed by association. They waited until reputation no longer mattered more than truth, until they were old enough that the institutions they had protected for decades could no longer protect them back. Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon, a man with a PhD in astronautics from MIT and a combat record that preceded his spaceflight career, had publicly described a monolith-like object on Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, and stated directly that it warranted serious and immediate scientific investigation. No hedging, no qualifying language, no exit taken. A man who had stood on the lunar surface in the full weight of his credentials, telling the world in plain language that something about the official story was incomplete. Edgar Mitchell came home from the moon, a changed man. You can see it in the photographs taken before and after his mission. Something behind his eyes shifted. In interview after interview, across his final years, he stated plainly that extraterrestrial intelligence is real, and that governments have known it for decades. Reporters leaned forward with softened follow-ups, offering him easier ground. He never took it. He said what he believed until he died. Al Worden, who orbited the moon during Apollo 15 while Scott and Irwin walked below him, told an interviewer without hesitation that he believed humanity descended from beings who came from somewhere other than Earth. Worden was measured, specific, completely uninterested in performing doubt for the camera's comfort. The interviewer laughed nervously at the directness of it. Worden didn't blink. These were not fringe figures. These were not men unraveling at the edges of old age. These were decorated military officers and PhD-level scientists. Men selected from thousands of candidates who spent their entire careers demonstrating that their judgment could be trusted with humanity's most consequential work. When one moonwalker describes anomalies, you can find reasons to set it aside. When all of them do, independently, across different missions, across different decades without coordination. That is not confusion. That is not collective delusion. That is a pattern, and patterns mean something. The real reason. We stopped in 2023. Someone asked Duke point blank, "Is there a cover-up?" He considered it carefully. Then he described it not as conspiracy, not shadowy men in dark rooms, but as institutional paralysis. NASA has data, photographs, documented observations from multiple missions suggesting the moon is considerably stranger than the dead rock the official narrative describes. Releasing it wouldn't just update a scientific model, it would challenge what people believe about our place in the universe, about whether we are alone, about whether the story of human history is complete. Year after year, decade after decade, they sit on it. Not malice, Duke said, cowardice. But that wasn't the real answer. Because then Duke said the thing that explains the last 50 years in a single breath. At the peak of Apollo, we were not winding down. We were just getting started. Permanent lunar bases were already designed. Missions were already planned. Astronauts were already selected and in training for flights that were never flown. The technology existed, the capability existed, the will existed. And then, in December 1972, after the crew of Apollo 17 lifted off from the lunar surface, it was over. No transition, no replacement program. Just a hard, immediate stop. As if someone had thrown a switch. 12 human beings had walked on another world across 4 years, in the greatest leap of exploration in all of recorded human history. Then, nothing. For half a century. The official explanation, budget cuts, Vietnam, Watergate, is not false. Those pressures were real and documented, but they had been present throughout the entire Apollo program. They were not new in December 1972. They had been navigated continuously without stopping the missions. Something else changed. The real reason, Duke has said, is that the people with decision-making authority looked at what Apollo was finding and recognized they were not prepared to face it publicly. Questions about who built structures on a world we assumed was pristine and uninhabited. Questions about deep time, about intelligence in the solar system predating our own, about whether humanity is as alone as every assumption of modern civilization has always required us to be. It was easier to stop going than to face what was being found. We didn't stop because we ran out of money. We found something up there we weren't ready to face, and 50 years later, we still aren't. The testimony. Charles Duke is 89 years old. He is sitting somewhere right now, in a room, in a chair, at the age his body has become. And he is carrying the knowledge that the most significant thing he ever witnessed has spent 5 decades being treated as though it didn't happen. He was the voice that guided humanity's first steps onto another world. He walked on that world himself 3 years later. He was, by every objective measure, one of the most accomplished and credible human beings of the 20th century. And now, in what he knows may be his final years, he is doing something that would have dismantled everything he built if he had attempted it earlier. He is telling the truth, all of it. In the time he has left, most people in their 80s protect their legacy. They smooth the rough edges, they edit the record toward the version that looks best when the obituaries are written. They make peace with the compromises they made and stop pulling on threads that might unravel them. Legacy protection is the work of old age for most people who have done significant things. Duke is doing the opposite. He walked on the moon. He saw things that appear in no official report. He reported things that were deliberately ignored. He took photographs that were never released. He spent 40 years keeping quiet because the institutional weight of NASA, of the United States government, of the entire cultural consensus about what the moon is and what was found there, made speaking an act of professional suicide. That constraint is gone now. And what he is saying, clearly on the record with the authority of a man who was actually there, is that the official account of what Apollo found on the moon is incomplete, that the incompleteness is not accidental, that decisions were made at levels above the astronauts to ensure the full account never reached the public. Here is what remains right now, as you finish watching this. The structures are still there. In the Descartes Highlands, exactly where they were on April 21st, 1972. Silent, patient, unchanged as they have been for what Duke believes are hundreds of millions of years. No one has gone back to study them. No mission has been sent to document them. No official has acknowledged they exist. The photographs are in a vault somewhere, dozens of them, crystal clear, taken by Duke's own gloved hands on an airless world, and quietly buried under 50 years of institutional silence. The men who could corroborate what he saw are dying. Some of them are already gone. The window for this account to be delivered by the people who lived it is closing, and everyone involved knows it. The questions those 12 old men finally said out loud at a private reunion in 2017 are still unanswered. The program that could have answered them was terminated in December 1972. That door has never been reopened. Charles Duke is 89. He was the voice in the room when history was made. He was on the surface when something impossible was found. He has spent half a century waiting for the institutions that silenced him to do the right thing on their own. They didn't. So now, before he dies, he is saying it himself, clearly on the record, with the full weight of everything he saw and everything he sacrificed by staying quiet. The moon was never the dead, empty rock the official story requires it to be. Something was there before us. Something built there, long before our species existed on Earth. Something left evidence of its presence that 12 human beings found, reported, and watched get quietly erased from the record. That is what Charles Duke needs people to know. Why has NASA never released those photographs? And what exactly are they still protecting you from? What does it mean that the men who actually went there have spent the last years of their lives saying the official story is incomplete? Drop your answer in the comments, and subscribe now, because what Apollo found on the moon is only the beginning of what has never been told.